The beauty of showing off your product to funeral professionals and families alike doesn't happen on its own. It takes the use of the Wilbert way. Let's take a look at the components of the Wilbert way and their use. The control and support corners with the end roller assembly. This portion of the Wilbert way is used to support, raise, and lower the unit in the grave. One complete assembly will be placed at each end of the vault. This component of the control corner is the brake assembly. In the locked position, the brake locks the drive shaft and prevents movement of the roller assemblies. The crank handle is placed onto the crankshaft and allows the lowering and retrieval of the control cables. The spools are attached to the end roller assemblies. By rotating the crank handle clockwise, the roller assemblies turn and raises the vault. Rotating the crank handle counterclockwise will lower the vault. The control cables are placed under the vault and wound onto the spools of the roller assemblies. These cables suspend the vault above the grave. The telescoping drive tube connects the two control corners together to act as a drive shaft for a one-man operation. As we'll show later in the demonstration, always be sure the tube is fully seated on each of the drive brake tubes. The vault cover carriage assemblies support the cover. They allow the pushing back of the cover, and after the casket is lowered, repositioning of the vault cover for sealing. The next item is the cover carriage rails. These rails are placed on top of the support and control corners, acting as a track for the cover carriage assemblies. Note that the carriage stop is on the outside of the control corner assembly. Now that we have a basic knowledge of the components of the Wilbert way, let's go to a cemetery and see a Wilbert way setup in progress. An inspection of the grave site will be necessary to determine the preliminary requirements needed for proper shoring of the grave. This inspection should include a visual assessment of the grave opening dimensions, as well as the stability of the surrounding area. After your preliminary inspection of the grave site, start placing your foundation for the Wilbert way. Begin by placing your grave end support planks. Note that these can be rough-cut lumber, preferably oak, or an aluminum composite for ease of handling. After placing grave end boards, it is necessary to assure that these boards are level. This is the foundation from which the remaining grave boards will be supported. Now that the end boards are properly placed and level, proper positioning of long grave boards and alignment with grave opening is easier. Taking a minute to shape a small mound in the bottom of your grave will ease the removal of your cables after lowering the vault. Before placing the vault over the grave, make a final check of shoring. Shoring must be level and have proper support to prevent the grave from collapsing. Taking time to properly position grave boards and the control support assembly will assure you of the correct alignment with the grave. Now that you have your grave shored, grave boards leveled and aligned, you're ready to place the vault. If you're using a boom truck, be sure and check for correct centering of boom. Position vault supports. Supports can be boards, pipes, or rollers. Place vault on supports. Be sure that grave boards and vault are aligned so that board repositioning will not be necessary. Once the cover is positioned squarely over the base, you're now ready to start your Wilbert way setup. Before starting the Wilbert way setup, let's take a few minutes to look at a grave situation that requires the use of blocking. To gain adequate elevation, it is necessary to use blocks to assure proper leveling of grave boards or skids. Now that the grave is level, the vault placement task is easier. Here, a motorized four-wheel vault dolly is being used. However, most any method of vault placement will work. Position the control and support corners with roller assembly attached at each end of the vault. Align upper portion of control corners with end of vault to allow placement of carriage rails. The placement of the control cables is critical. Lay the cable along the side of the vault. The cable should be passed between corner support and the vault. Place the end of the control cable to the inside lip of the spool and roll on 7 to 9 turns. The cable must travel up and over the spool. Repeat the placement of the cable into the lip of the spool at the opposite end of the vault. Roll up all the slack. Uneven turns on the spools will cause the vault to list. Too few turns on the spools will not allow the vault to reach the bottom of the grave. The cover carriage assembly is placed onto the cover by sliding the carriage shoes along the lower edge of the cover. Support the carriage assembly and tighten. Over-tightening will break the corners of the cover. Check to see the carriage shoes are secured against the edge of the cover. The telescoping drive tube connects the two control corners. The drive tube acts as a drive shaft for a one-man operation. The tube must be fully seated on each end of the drive shaft. The cover carriage rail is secured to the control and support corners by a hooking action. The rails are placed on the top of the corners. The cover carriage stop should not be between the two control and support corners. Slide the stop to the end of the rails. Unlock the brake at each end of the drive shaft. Place the crank handle on the control corner crankshaft. Turn the crank handle and lift the vault. When the vault is raised to allow sufficient clearance to remove vault supports, lock the brake and remove the supports. To lower the vault, unlock the brake and turn the crank handle counterclockwise. The vault is lowered until the rollers align and are fully meshed with the cover rails. Lock the brake. If the opposite end roller is lower than the rail, raising the vault is not necessary. Use a plank or similar object to pry the roller in place. Unlock the brake and turn the crank handle to lower the vault. Lower the vault to the desired position and lock the brake. Remove the handle. The cover is pushed along the rails and must be clear of the vault base. Place the cover carriage stop against the roller. Placement of the lowering device with one man can be done by positioning the heads on the rails. Lift the CLD and slide the heads along the rails until the CLD is directly over the vault base. Make a final check to lock the CLD heads onto the rails. Over-tightening of the CLD straps will cause damage to the side tube assemblies. The use of rollers, safety straps, or safety chains is recommended. The Wilbert Way setup is complete. The vault was cleaned at the plant. However, some touch-up is required. The use of the Wilbert Way reduces the final cleaning of the vault. This committal service with the use of the Wilbert Way affords visual above-ground sealing. It is efficient and adds dignity to every interment. A Wilbert Way service is your #1 salesman. Notice, placing the grass over the grave boards before placement of the Wilbert Way gives a professional appearance. After the casket has been lowered into the vault and the CLD removed, roll the cover into place for sealing. Place crank handle on crankshaft. Unlock the brake and raise the vault base by turning the crank handle. Continue until base seal tongue enters seal groove and lifts vault cover carriage assemblies up from the rails. Lock the brake and remove the cover carriage assemblies. Remove the rails. Place crank handle on crankshaft, unlock brake, and lower vault. When vault is lowered into the grave, remove the connecting tube. Slide the spools to the center of the end roller assembly and remove the cables. Return to control end, slide spools to the center and remove the cables. If mound clearance is sufficient, cables may be removed by hand. If unable to remove cables by hand, wrap the cables around the spool and crank as needed.